Chapter 7 Special Commission The following morning, when my senses sluggishly saw fit to rise from the sea of the subconscious, I guessed that the hour was not an early one. The warmth of my blankets held appeal, but I resisted the impulse to lower my lids again and deny the world of reality. I rose with a half groan, my feet searched the cold floor for my worn bedroom slippers, and shortly thereafter, clutching my dressing gown round me, I descended to the sitting room of our bachelor abode. The possibility that Sherlock Holmes, habitually a late riser, might still be abed was disproved by the acrid smell of the strong shag of his morning pipe, which assaulted my nostrils on the stairs. I found my friend seated at the desk regarding messages. "My good Watson," he said, without looking up, "the heel of one of your slippers is loose. Do have it looked at, after before you come a copper." "How did you—" I began, and then bit back the words. "A revealing sound during my descent, no doubt," I concluded. "Exactly. We readily detect the sounds of others, but tend to ignore those we make ourselves." Holmes rose to knock out his pipe in the fireplace. "But we cannot ignore some news just in. Action is called for, and I have a special commission for you." My spirits brightened. It had been some time since the disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax, but the adventure remained etched in my mind. Surely Watson is in error here. The disappearance of Lady Carfax is generally agreed to have been in the summer of 1902, long after this adventure. Holmes had deputized me to conduct an investigation relative to the lady, and his critique had been to the point. "A very pretty hash you have made of it," were his words, and he had twisted the knife further by later adding, "I cannot at the moment recall any possible blunder that you have omitted." Since that moment I had yearned for the chance to redeem myself. "It is vital that I have someone on the scene at Macewood," continued Holmes. "But Gilligan and Styles—" I began. "I have a cable from Slim on the desk, but I need an inside man, Watson. Matters are coming to a head with greater rapidity than I anticipated. You can catch the late morning train for Surrey at Waterloo." "And my mission?" "You will inform Clyde Deeds that I have uncovered a warm trail as regards his nocturnal intruder. Let me impress upon you, old fellow, that this is true. We are not telling the gentleman the whole story, but that's neither here nor there." Holmes was regarding me closely. "Deceit is not one of your strong points, and I want you at ease with your conscience." "Oh, come now." A hand gesture stifled my retort, a good thing, since this subject was shaky ground for me. "Tell Dietz that you wish to make inquiries in Lichfield and the surrounding area. You can be a bit mysterious about it. Clients rather like that. He will offer you the use of a carriage, but you suggest that you could perform your investigations better from horseback." "Holmes, would you have me take on a race horse?" "Tut, tut! Have no fear of that. I'm sure he can provide a hunter suitable to your needs. Well, it's been a while since I've been in a saddle, but I suppose I can carry it off. Assuming our duplicity holds water, as I fancy it will, ride off in the direction of Lichfield, out of sight of the establishment. Circle the area carefully, making note of the roads and where they lead. You'll have to ride into the hamlet itself to preserve the facade of conducting an investigation. Pay particular attention to the railroad, Watson. I'm to survey the terrain then. Sounds a bit like a military campaign. Agreed, said Holmes with an approving smile that banished some of my doubts. Also, I want you to acquaint yourself with the stables at Macewood, especially those devoted to the riding animals. Locate the tack room. Mention that you are addicted to strolls after dinner. I want you familiar with the stable area in the dark. Deeds may volunteer to accompany you, so much the better. Horses are his business, so he'll readily give you a guided tour. Now, one other thing. When you arrive at the breeding farm, manage to be at the window of the room made available to you between 9 and 9:30 at night. Extinguish the lights and use a candle. Pass it 3 times back and forth before the window. Then await an answering signal. 3 flashes from a lantern. Repeat the process if necessary until your signal has been acknowledged. I regarded Holmes with an expression akin to astonishment. But why this hocus pocus? Reminds me of that Baskerville affair. Holmes's concerned and serious manner was swallowed up by a chuckle. So it does. Hadn't occurred to me. But consider that for my peace of mind, I must know your exact location. You play such an important part in the weapon that we are forging. His words produced a glow of pride, and my spirits rallied at the thought that he placed such faith in me. Later it occurred to me that his words actually revealed nothing, and when I was on the Surrey-bound train, I experienced a moment of panic at the realization that I knew so little of Holmes's plans. His instructions did not appear to involve anything vital at all, but I banished my misgivings, determined to let the drama unfold. I really had very little choice. Holmes had cabled ahead, alerting Deeds of my arrival, and the same carriage and driver, Alfred, awaited me at the Lichfield station. My host had held luncheon for me, and as indicated previously, he set a fine board. He was seemingly delighted to learn that Holmes was onto something, as I put it. My revelations were flimsy fabrics, indeed, but I managed to introduce some suggestive silences and wise looks, all of which he readily accepted. Suddenly I realized that the threadbare information which Holmes had dispatched me had been no oversight by the master manhunter. Detailed explanations were not needed, and I felt that I had earned some scattered applause interspersed by a few faint bravos. Not for my performance as the supposed investigator, but for the fact that my words were honored without question. The career of my friend was at this period certainly approaching its zenith, and his name was a household word, due in part to the recountings of certain of his adventures that I had made available to the reading public. When Holmes was on a case, his methods were immune to criticism, and in truth the solution was considered a fait accompli. Such was the aura of infallibility that surrounded his name that even a sophisticated man of the world like Dietz was caught up in the cloak of invincibility worn by the man from Baker Street. When Dooley the butler showed me to my room, I found that my valise had been opened and my things hung up. The aged family retainer during the serving of lunch must have heard my request for the use of a horse, for there were riding pants available, along with boots that suited me nicely. The butler was a bit long in the tooth for the trade of espionage, but I felt he would be pleasing to Mycroft Holmes, who put such store in anticipation. Dietz took me personally to the stables and had a groom saddle up a chestnut mare, all the while assuring me that she was a gentle animal. As Holmes had instructed, I made note of the area where the saddles, bridles, and blankets were kept, resolving to revisit it come nightfall. Dietz gave me simple directions to Lichfield and mentioned that should I get lost, my steed would, if given a free rein, return me to Macewood without fail. I sensed that, with the eye of an expert, he placed little faith in my horsemanship. I had managed to make a fair mount and set off with high resolve to emulate cavalry officers I had known when with the 5th Northumberland, my old regiment. I must have been holding the curb rein too tight, for the chestnut, Fandango by name, worried at her bit and was lathering at the mouth, showing a disposition to introduce short, nervous sidesteps. I loosened the reins and contented myself with indicating my desired direction by the pressure of my knees, an arrangement that seemed to suit the horse, who relaxed so that we both were able to enjoy the warm afternoon sun and bracing air. Some distance from Macewood, I diverted from the main road to the neighboring village and started a wide circle round the breeding farm. Now, Fandango introduced another little trick in her repertoire. Since we were not moving away from Macewood, at every crossroads she chose to veer in the direction that would return us to its pastures. After some urging on my part, we reached a meeting of the minds and my mount abandoned visions of her stall, oats, and a rub-down. The winding country roads were in good condition, considering the spring rains, and the whole area, in contrast to Macewood itself, was heavily timbered. Hemlock, chestnut, and elm were in profusion, and it occurred to me that the coloration of Fandango blended well with the surrounding trees. My riding apparel was beige, and were I to pull off the road and remain motionless in the timber, I fancied my mount and I would be difficult to spot. The lane I had chosen inclined upwards after a while, and soon I was on a bluff looking down on a pleasant valley. The gleam of rails was discernible to the left, and, as I followed them visually, I noted a freight terminus of some size with a variety of tracks on which boxcars and freight carriers stood, many empty and with their doors open. This puzzled me somewhat, being removed from Lichfield, until I realized that the rails I had first noted were probably a branch line, and that sizable freight trains were assembled at this terminus and then dispatched for the run into the metropolis of London. It was a country freight yard, and I had chanced upon. Well, Holmes had drawn my attention to the railroad, so I abandoned my proposed circuit of Macewood and rode a little way along the path until I found a trail leading down from the bluff and into the valley. I made note of the area in case my side journey turned into a dead end, and I was forced to return this way. Once on level ground, I followed the rails towards Lichfield. When we turned away from Macewood, Fandango again showed a disposition to sulk, but she finally became reconciled to the situation and mustered a presentable single foot that did not bounce me too much in the saddle, though certain portions of my posterior gave promise of tenderness. The single foot segued into a canter, and I realized that Fandango was a gaited horse when she accelerated into a rack that ate up ground with a gentle rapidity. The horse-like deeds sensed my ineptitude and seemed to be making things easy for me, or perhaps she was in a hurry to get the matter over and get back to a nosebag. On the outskirts of Lichfield, Fandango decelerated onto her single foot, probably her most showy gait, and I fancy we made a sporty pair as we entered the hamlet, which was little more than one street of about two city blocks in length, terminating at the railroad station. As I suspected, there was a cable office adjacent to the station, and I drew up before it, and carefully and slowly quitted my saddle with no more than a few grunts. I led Fandango to the horse trough in the approved style, and then secured her reins on an adjacent rail right next to a mounting box. I'd gotten off without falling on my face, and perhaps I could resume my seat with dignity as well. At the cable office I entered and made a show as though inquiring about a message. Actually, I just exchanged some words with the telegrapher about the weather, and he must have thought I was a lonesome soul indeed, vacating these premises. I noted that the local inn, a small establishment, was named the Red Lion. Were I to possess a pound note for every inn by that name in Britain, I might well have a box at the races next to Lord Balmoral. The Red Lion had to be the centre of Liechtenstein's limited social life, so I set my feet towards it resolutely. Then I saw them, two Chinamen on the opposite side of the street, and coming towards me. Well, I had not been friend and biographer of Sherlock Holmes for so long without recognizing the makings of a shrewd move. Orientals don't just happen in the depths of Surrey, contrary to the experience of our American cousins. English hands iron English shirts, and most of our railroads were built with the assistance of the Welsh and the Cornish. The Chinese had to be visitors and hence had to be residing at the inn. I hastened my steps and preceded them into the edifice by the way of the pub door conveniently available. Being already on the premises, they could not suspect me of following them should they make an appearance. Chinese spelled choose and fu, and while the grip of the former crime czar on Limehouse had been broken, it made sense that many of the retainers he still had left would be of his race. I assumed a chance at the empty bar and wished I had a riding crop to tap against my boots as I ordered a stout. The barkeep was a man of few words, but when he filled my order, he summoned 7 of them, revealing in the process his Scots ancestry. "I ken your name from these parts." "A visitor, my good man, as you have discerned." I felt that a sop to the Scots power of observation might lead to more discernment on other subjects, but he indicated little interest in my length of stay, point of origin, or anything else. After giving the polished wood surface a perfunctory swipe with a bar rag, he retired to the end of the room to throw darts at the inevitable board, keeping his eye sharp for some bets with the evening trade, I thought. However, said practice was interrupted, to my delight, by the entrance of the Chinese. In very broken English they requested tea and retired to a side table and low conversation in their native tongue. The barkeep relayed the order through a service window in the back of the bar and resumed his dart activity. I was considering ordering another draft and wondering how I might get closer to the Chinese, a fruitless task since I could not understand one word of their conversation. Then there was another entry, a disconcerting incident to the barkeep who had just scored 2 center hits and was intent on making it 3. As it happened, his services were not required. A thin little man in nondescript clothes found his way inside with some difficulty, holding his throat with one hand and gesturing at his mouth with the other. When he spoke, it was in a croak with some effort. "Is there a doctor round?" Lifelong training took over. "I'm a doctor," I said, promptly crossing to him. "Got something stuck in my windpipe," he wheezed. I removed his hand from his throat and, using 2 fingers, pried his jaws apart, peering down his gullet. But the light in the pub was dim. I ran a finger in an exploratory move past his tongue, for this could be serious. But he had started to choke and I removed my digit while I still had it. He gestured towards the door and I seized him by the arm with a gesture of agreement, leading him outside into the afternoon sun. With his back to the door, I started to open his mouth again when things took a singular turn. Don't give it a fake look-see, Dr. Watson, for it's a dodge. Me throat's tip-top. I started to draw back from the man with a shocked expression, and alarm bells rang in my ears. "Keep looking, Doc," he urged in a low voice, raising his chin as though to aid my efforts. As I made a dumb show of peering into his orifice, he spoke quietly and distinctly, no mean feat, with his mouth wide open. Pay no attention to the chinks, Doc. Mr. Holmes don't want those boyos to get a wind-up. Just make your way back to Macewood and we'll watch your signal tonight. Then you are Slippery Stiles, Doc. Good heavens, I thought, the human shadow. I'd never seen him close to before, but when Holmes wanted someone followed, Stiles was the man he called for. My friend contended that Slippery could follow a sinner into hell without getting his coat singed. Momentarily inspired, I whipped out a pocket handkerchief, holding it to Styles's mouth and slapping him on the back. The little man made a nice show of apparently coughing up a chicken bone or some such object. There lurks in all of us the desire to perform even in an empty theatre, and I was so imbued by this adventure that I had a happy inspiration. My room is on the front of Macewood, I mentioned, as though I were telling the chap that he was all right now. Gotcha, Doc. Till tonight. With the feeling that all was not amiss, I returned to the pub to pay for my drink and departed full of self-approval, since I had not cast a single glance at the mysterious Chinese. As I managed, with the help of the mounting block, to straddle Fandango and get my feet into the irons, I reasoned that Holmes must already be alerted to the presence of Orientals in the vicinity of Macewood, no doubt from Gilligan's cable. Going down the street, Fandango gave indications of following a different route and seemed to harbor definite ideas about it. It occurred to me that the horse would take me back to the breeding farm in the most direct manner if allowed to, so I was content to let her take charge. After all, there is a limit to the patience of a five-gaited show horse. Such she had to be to successfully transport a middle-aged doctor of sedentary habits safely uphill and down dale through the Surrey countryside. Back at Macewood Stud, I had ample time to wash up and change for dinner before joining Deeds in the drawing room. His Irish whiskey was on a par with his Burgundy, and seated next to a pleasing fire, my blood running faster from the day's ride, I resolved to treat said spirits with respect. My host had a pleasing personality, as I had noted before, though he was not as loquacious or as rapid in his speech as he had been during our first meeting at Baker Street. I informed him that my afternoon had produced no results, and considering mentioning the two Chinese, but abandoned the thought. It could do no good and might do the reverse. I tried to lead the conversation to horse breeding. Deeds spoke easily and fluently on that subject, and I resolved to give more attention to the bloodlines of my racing choices in the future. Whenever the conversation dragged, I resorted to previous cases of Holmes' conversational crutch that I could use with facility that had always found ready ears. I did mention that I thought Holmes would conclude his London investigation shortly and would join us in the country. It seemed the sporting thing to do, and apparently this proved welcome news. Butler Dooley, like all of his rare breed, appeared with seeming omniscience whenever needed, and gave indication of having a sharp pair of ears to boot. His master had absented himself for a moment, for some undisclosed reason, and the butler inquired with concern if it were possible for Mr. Holmes to share my room should he be arriving shortly. He explained that Mrs. Deeds had been in the process of redecorating all the other bedrooms save the master suite prior to her sudden departure for her sister's home on Tuesday. The reference to sudden departure rather pricked my ears, and then the day of the week mentioned caught my attention. It now being Thursday, this would mean that Deed's wife had been bustled off to her sister's on the day that he visited us at Baker Street. I forestalled the servant's departure with the indication that a refill would be acceptable, and thought furiously. Was it Tuesday that your mistress left, Dooley? I asked, with what I hoped was a casual air. I was of a mind that it was Monday. Oh, no, sir. The mistress left on Tuesday, all right, for it was the same day Mr. Deeds went to London. Well, our client had specified that his wife had taken her trip before the incident of the intruder. I also thought it singular that the lady was removed from the estate immediately following the happening. Obviously, Dietz was more concerned about the matter than he had indicated, or possibly his wife was of a nervous nature, though this did not coincide with my picture of an English lady satisfied with the rural life of a country estate, as high-toned as it might be. I decided to abandon this subject when I realized that, for all I knew, Mrs. Deeds was not English at all, and her life at Macewood might not be a happy one either. "Dooley," I said, accepting a refill that I noted was liberal, "Mr. Deeds tells me you have been with the family for some time." "I had the honor of serving his father." "After his travels, sir?" "His travels, sir?" The question to my question was delivered so immediately and honestly that I almost spoke of the famous Captain Spaulding and his explorations, but drew back in time. I was getting in too deep and was rather glad that the present master of the house returned at this moment. Shortly thereafter, we dined, following which my host graciously took me for a stroll round the grounds, providing excellent cigars for us both to enjoy during it, though I have always felt that the taste and aroma of a cigar loses something in the open air. They, like good brandy, are meant to be enjoyed in a comfortable easy chair, to be savoured, as 'twere. I told the equine expert about the monograph Holmes had once published dealing with the ash of every known brand of cigar and tobacco, and rather lengthily titled "Upon the Distinction between the Ashes of Various Tobaccos." This so intrigued Dietz, who obviously enjoyed the good things of life, that I was able to guide our footsteps without seeming to into the area of the stables containing the riding horses. and I used my eyes as well as I could and managed a few leading questions as well. Life on a breeding farm evidently began at an early hour. It was with no difficulty that I was able to reach my bedroom before 9. My riding habit of the day had been carefully brushed, and the boots polished to a fine sheen. But the container in which my toilet articles were kept had not been opened. A tiny piece of wax was still under the cover when I opened it. This was a trick that I had learned from Holmes years ago. Within was the small candle that I had taken the precaution to include with my razor and the rest of my kit. Extinguishing the lights on the hour, I lit the candle and passed it 3 times across the center window of my room. I then snuffed out the flame and blinked my eyes to allow clearer vision in the darkness. Another trick of the sleuth. In short order there were 3 answering flashes from the woods. Quick work, I thought, but then Gilligan and Styles already knew which side of the house to watch. My trip into Litchfield had been of some benefit. Clear country air, free from the oily smoke of Channel coal, had a soporific effect, and I felt myself drifting off to sleep almost immediately. My final thoughts were that it had not been a wasted day, and I could think of no grievous errors I had made. Possibly I had some aptitude in the sleuthing line after all. The following day gave promise of being a repetition of the previous one. Fandango seemed more familiar with my ways and allowed me, with a resigned air, I thought, to make a complete circuit of the estate. I noted the various roads and paths as best I could, along with the general terrain. Then we travelled to Lichfield, where I avoided the Red Lion, but from habit visited the cable office. I was somewhat surprised to find a message there, not yet dispatched to Macewood. It was brief, as Holmes's cables were wont to be. Inform those concerned of my arrival tomorrow. S.H. I allowed Fandango her head, returning to the stud farms, and she made a rapid job of it. A good thing too, since I had noted a number of aches and pains when we had set out, and our brisk return trip seemed to relieve them rather than compound the problem. I informed Dietz of the contents of the cable, and he finally expressed curiosity, reasonable under the circumstances. I wonder what he has learned. It was a general question, but I sensed he expected an answer and might be a little suspicious if I didn't get one. Sorry, if he didn't get one. Well, old boy, I thought you'd better make this good. Holmes has remarked often that subtlety is not one of your talents. Let's prove him wrong. Holmes was not a fabricator. He did not have to be. But I had noted that when he found it expedient to lay a false scent, he employed as much of the truth as possible. I determined to follow this principle in my first attempt at flim-flammery. I seldom know all of Holmes's moves until after the checkmate. Well, that was certainly true. As he mentioned, I continued, The fact that the intruder used a bolo-type device alerted him to a South American as a possibility. I can give you a guess. Deeds indicated this would be appreciated. Holmes's knowledge of the criminal classes is extensive, and in addition, he has access to the files of Scotland Yard and the Surete as well, if need be. I didn't dwell on the criminal archive of the Berlin police. No sense in overdoing it. I think he has selected possibilities from known second-story men who are agile, strong, but small. Why small? The very look in Deed's eyes was fading away. He pulled himself up to the balcony in short order and descended into a trice. Otherwise, you would have seen him. That's not easy for a weighty man. Holmes pictures a type like a tumbler or acrobat, who is also adept with a weighted line. He has been narrowing the list, and his cable indicates that he now has a prime suspect. But how does this tie in with your presence here? Not that your company hasn't been welcome, Dietz hastened to add with the true instincts of a proper host. Your stories of Mr. Holmes's cases have been of great interest. I hope I estab- sorry, I hope I exhibited a magnanimous air. For safety's sake, I resorted to the oft-used device of a Socratial response. Would you think it possible that a man of that description might have been seen in this area? He nodded. Of course, what else could he do? In fact, the culprit might still be in the vicinity planning a second attempt. If so, I stated with a touch of bravado, my presence on the scene might deter such an idea. Dietz's boyish smile had returned. You detectives really have to touch all the wickets, don't ya? Detail, painstaking detail, the sifting of all the facts and finally the forming of the relevant elements into a mosaic, a design that throws the harsh light of truth on what happened, or possibly, of more importance, what might happen. As well to be hung for a sheep as a goat, I thought. Deeds didn't really know what I was talking about, for I didn't know myself, but it had a good sound to it, and obviously played a pleasant tune in his ears. I resolved to attend future discussions between Holmes and our client, lest some of my words come back at me. I was present, but not at all in the manner that I had anticipated.